This session today is called Embracing Change, and my name is Neil Wilkins. We're going to be talking about mindset and skills. There's a whole bunch of stuff involved with embracing the concept of change, and what we're going to cover as we go through this are a set of techniques and some ways of thinking that you can explore if change is one of those things that you don't necessarily feel particularly comfortable with. Now, there are some certainties in life. I mean, two that are very well known: death and taxes. I think there's a phrase that has been sort of very well published and publicized over the decades that the only two certainties are death and taxes. But I would say that there's a third, and that is the inevitability that everything changes. I mean, everything really changes. And so what I want to do as we go through this conversation, and if you have any things that you disagree with, or you have any observations or any questions, please do use the Q&A section on this session, and the chat facility as well is available. Because I'm going to challenge that change really isn't a bad thing at all. I think a lot of people like the fact that there is this kind of comfort blanket of certainty. You might use the word normality, predictability, and that you kind of feel some sort of security and safety in that. But I'm going to challenge that change can be so good that you'll actually feel it's positive, and that actually you might even seek change as a concept or as an entity, and that you'll certainly, by the end of this, if you choose to, be able to embrace this at every opportunity. And so, as I said at the outset, this is very much about a mindset. So it's about a way of thinking. It's about a way of framing the concept of change. But it's also then about understanding some models and techniques that you can use if you decide that you need to make change more kind of friendly, or a friend of yours in your life, both professionally and personally. So for many people, because this is, or has been over recent years for a whole bunch of different reasons, a very unsettling phase, I guess, for humanity, certainly for society in most countries, and a lot of organizations as well. Very unsettling, a lot of unplanned, I guess you could perceive as uncontrollable change. It's really, really important to become aware of the concept of change, and actually that it is a set of choices, really, and that all change is both measurable, it's able to be evaluated, you're able to consider it, you're able to reflect upon change, and then you're also able to make decisions based on your judgments, really, of a new potential scenario that you'll find yourself in. And as I say, this is very much relating to you in your personal life as much as it is in any kind of sort of working scenario. Phoebe Cummings, a well-known ceramicist and artist, has used the phrase, "We are in constant preparation for the next moment." And to me, of all of the quotes, all of the great thinking and the great philosophies around the concept of change, I just find the simplicity of that statement just a thing of absolute beauty. We are in constant preparation for the next moment. And if you think about it, everything that you're doing is actually in preparation for the next moment, be it you're eating or drinking something to fuel yourself for the next activity that you have. You might be sat in work planning your next project or campaign, and that is something that is going to happen in a future moment. So constantly everything that we're doing is preparing for a future moment. And so actually, change is all around us. Change is part of our everyday fabric, professionally and personally. So isn't it interesting that a lot of us fear change? A lot of us believe that we are returning to normal. How many times did you hear that phrase said after the pandemic? Or how many times did you use it yourself? Returning to normal. Oh, when we get back to normal. Well, I think Phoebe's sort of phrase there is that actually we are all pointing forwards. There is one, no normal, but two, actually we're constantly preparing for a future moment, the next moment. And so actually what's gone before is just going to give us a context to be able to plan, to manage the inevitable change that is coming. And so it really is about a mindset. It really is about the way that we look at things. You know, if you change the way that you look at things, the things you look at change. That was Dr. Wayne Dyer, one of the great thinkers, philosophers, and sort of spiritual leaders over the last few decades. And Dr. Dyer would always sort of be looking at the concept of change as a positive entity and actually use it to frame how we position things in our lives. So, you know, we might be living in a particular house, but it might not necessarily be the house that we're always going to be living in. So if we treat it as our cocoon, as our safety shelter now, but not necessarily become too attached to it, then we can perceive it and we can work with it in a way that is suitable and appropriate. Oprah Winfrey said that the greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change their future by merely changing their attitude. Again, change coming through there, change of attitude changes your future. In other words, if you believe a certain thing or a certain concept or a certain possibility or opportunity may well happen, then what you do is you change the environment in which that is likely or possible to happen. A lot of people call this manifestation, by creating the right mindset, the right frame of mind, and then putting in place the building blocks or the stepping stones or the opportunities or the route map that guides you in that same direction. Can open up a whole host of things that would otherwise just remain undiscovered or would remain hidden because, well, I'm too frightened to change. I can't change that. I need to stay in my comfort zone of normal. So embracing a change mindset feels like it could be a good thing. JoyBell C, the author, said, "You will find that it's necessary to let things go simply for the reason that they're heavy." When you embrace the concept of a change mindset, it is possible very, very quickly to let things go. Things that may be weighing you down, stones in your backpack, virtual stones in your backpack that you find yourself carrying every day. So these could be roots to your past. These could be things that, you know, are no longer serving you, tethers, if you like, or things that are really holding you back. Those kinds of things, well, we can change those. We can reframe them. We can reposition them. And that's what this conversation really is all about, is actually taking a position of reflection, a position of, you know, just really being sort of curious, if you like, about how did I get to where I am right now, professionally and personally. I'm sat here in this particular situation, in this particular location, doing this thing that I'm doing. How did I get here? Well, I got here through a whole process and series of changes, probably changes to your experience, your knowledge, and your wisdom, changes to the people around you, changes to the things that you valued, the things that you used, the service that you gave. All of these things will have constantly changed to bring you to today. Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." Again, concept of change coming through in one of the great sort of religious leaders of our time, and saying, you know, that being the change you wish to see around you, don't expect others to change for you. Don't expect others to take accountability for your world and your decisions. Your world, your life, your career, your prospects, your future is based around your mindset, around the change that needs to happen to take you in the direction that you wish to go. And as Gandhi said, you know, it is very much that as soon as you start to embrace that change, you'll see things around you changing. And inevitably, and it's not all going to be good, but inevitably on balance, these things will be positive. Jack Welch, great business leader over many, many decades, said, change before you have to. You may have heard the phrase, mend your roof, or mend the hole in your roof whilst the sun is shining. In other words, don't leave it until it rains before you mend that leak. Change before you have to. And I guess the fact that you're listening and watching this here today, It means that you've actually got a little bit of curiosity around the concept of change. So maybe today, maybe this moment right now is that opportunity to kind of seize the moment and think, do you know, actually change is all around me. Things are changing. Things have always been changing. Well, there is no normal, so therefore everything in the future is going to change. So why don't I ride this new wave of opportunity? And if I can embrace it, if I can make my mindset right, if I can kind of just stay awake to all these possibilities, endless possibilities, and be mindful of the change around me and be very observant and adapt, reflect, and then react to it, is there an opportunity to lead a better life? Is there a better opportunity for career development? Is there just a better opportunity to be a bigger, better, kinder, more empathic, more useful person in this life? Well, I would say with all those questions, the answer probably is yes. A lot of these great quotes come from people who kind of figured it out and then led and helped others, those around them, and particularly they were changing before they had to do the same. So that's really what we can do here. So you have potentially an old way, the ways and the things and the choices and the decisions that you've made that have got you right to this point here today as you listen to this. And then you've got choices about the change that's going to happen in what you might term the new way, those next steps that you're going to take. Because if you keep doing the same thing that you've always done, you're always going to get the things that you've always had. Again, another, what you might term, well, a bit of a cliche, but if you think of that, if you think about that, that is about just being conscious about embracing change. Those are the kinds of quotes that just make you stop and give you the opportunity to think, oh, yes. Tony Robbins, one of the, well, very, very passionate leaders in terms of mindfulness and in terms of personal development, says that there is a 5-step change mindset. And the 5 steps that Tony talks about are changing and challenging your limiting beliefs, facing your fears, shifting your perspective, changing your self-talk, and getting support. So what does he mean? Well, if you notice here, this is not all about just being positive. We see so much in the media and online. If you were looking at, embracing change, if you did a search for embracing change, you'd see so much content that was figuring out how to be positive, how to have a positive mindset, how to be, really punch in the air every morning. And yes, I'm going to embrace change. And even Tony Robbins, one of the most passionate, one of the most animated personal development coaches on the planet, is actually grounded when it comes to change. Challenging your limiting beliefs, the first of the 5 steps of changing your mindset, challenging your limiting beliefs, spending time with yourself in your mindset and thinking, what things do I think about and have I often or always thought about that limit the change that I'm willing to take? Do I talk myself out of things? Do I believe certain things about myself that limit the possibilities or the opportunities that I have in the choices I'm going to make as I look at the changes I'm going to do going forward? What are my limiting beliefs? And believe me, we all have them. It's that little voice on your shoulder that says, oh, you're not experienced enough really to do that, are you, Neil? Come on. Or you haven't really got the time to do that. Or, oh, yes, well, remember when you did that before? It didn't work last time, did it? Challenging those limiting beliefs. And this phrase, and I'm sure you've heard of it, imposter syndrome. I noticed actually on social media this morning, there were quite a few posts, and I don't know whether it was because I'd been thinking a lot about embracing change. And in preparation for this talk, I've been just then noticing certain things. Have you noticed that happens? When you start focusing on something, you start noticing that thing and it crops up and pops up. And it isn't just Siri and Alexa pointing it in your direction. It is the fact that, yes, you're just tuned into it. Well, I saw this phrase, imposter syndrome, appearing in social this morning in quite a few places. And I thought, well, there's a limiting belief. Imposter syndrome, the fact that you jump out of your comfort zone because you don't necessarily have the full set of qualifications or the confidence to be 100% correct or 100% effective in something. That's a limiting belief. Even the phrase imposter syndrome is a limiting belief. And so the second point is facing your fears. Be confident enough to make change that goes in a direction that you might not have been before. Most of the fun, most of the things that you'll experience, most of the gains in wisdom and knowledge you're going to have in your life as part of a change mindset will be when you face your fears. I'm a great believer that you don't learn anything when the sun's shining or when it's going really well. The only time you really truly learn stuff is when it's going hard, when it's going really wrong, or when you've had to really adjust and go for a plan B. So face your fears. Often you can then challenge yourself and think, what could possibly be the worst thing that could go wrong? And when you think of it in those terms, it's like, well, actually, that's not really all bad, is it? Shifting your perspective, point number 3 in Tony Robbins' 5-step change mindset, shifting your perspective. Look at things from a different angle. Maybe hover above yourself and look down on yourself and think, hold on, I'm doing okay. Why would I be worried about change? Look, I've got all this support around me. I've got this certain scenario. You know, you might be financially secure or not, but you might have the skills and experience to change or do something about it. Shifting your perspective from just having this one-track, narrow-minded perspective on life can be a great way to change your mindset. Point 4, changing your self-talk. This is this constant dialogue that we all have. You know, we're all programmed as human beings to have this kind of reflection within ourselves. Often it is at a subconscious level, but often it can also be our conscious ego talking, the ego just saying, okay, I can do this. And if I do this, this is going to happen, or can't do that because if I do that, that might happen. This constant self-talk, this constant prejudgment of what might happen, the storytelling, that's not a change mindset. Change mindset will be changing that self-talk to just being curious about, okay, if I take this next step, I'm going to be completely present, completely open and awake. And rather than storytell what I think might happen, just be really observant as to what actually does happen. So changing your self-talk, not to preempt outcomes when you take these steps into a new situation or scenario at work or at home, but actually just being really observant and curious. I've made the decision to change this thing. Now let's watch and see what happens. And of course, then point 5 really comes into play, getting support. Now, this could be a coach like Tony Robbins, or it could be somebody you know. It could be a friend, a colleague, a peer, or just a trusted other to change your change mindset. Now, this is an interesting one, because if you can be working with a trusted other to maybe bounce a few ideas around as to, okay, well, how fast can I change? What should I be changing? Are there things that I can, basically be drawing in as resources to help me change? And it's not a bad thing. We need to be thinking of this in a relatively positive light, because all of this is opening up opportunities, both to be mindful of potentially good outcomes, but also being really observant so that we might then, having changed, change again. And I'll come on to constant and continuous change in just a moment. But what is not a change mindset? Okay, so I would say it's only using positive words when you're talking. That's not a change mindset. A change mindset is much more pragmatic and stoic than that. It isn't thinking that everything, just because I've decided I'm going to change, is going to be great. The chances are it won't all be great. But if you're observant and curious and in the moment and present, does that really matter? So positive affirmations are not part of a change mindset, in my view. Use the chat or the Q&A if you disagree. Pushing out all feelings that aren't positive. No, I don't think that's part of a change mindset either. You can feel nervous. Just because you have a change mindset does not make you inhuman. It's basically about being observant of those feelings and actually feeling the fear, feeling the empowerment, feeling the excitement, feeling the worry, feeling the nervousness, feeling the joy, whatever the feelings are. You don't have to push out any that aren't positive. That is fundamentally wrong, because that's in disguise. That is kind of shrouding this change with this kind of cloak of invincibility, which is simply not practical. Next point on the change mindset, which you shouldn't be thinking about really, is using words that evoke strength and success. But to me, that is just so false and fake. You don't have to be strong to embrace change. Embracing change is about being human. It's about potentially being vulnerable. Go and look at Brené Brown's work on the concept of vulnerability. I talk a lot about this because it comes into play here. Being positive, being successful, embracing change also come with feelings of vulnerability, feelings of not being perfect, not as far as imposter syndrome that we talked about before, but just being honest and true. So practicing positive affirmations, well, okay, as part of a change mindset, yeah, maybe at times, but not to the complete disregard of everything else. So positive affirmation, yes, you want to be a positive person, but not to the exclusion of all else. Being honest and making honest affirmations are going to be far more comfortable as you take this change journey. Directing your thoughts, well, yes, being present, I would certainly agree with that one. Believing you'll succeed, yeah, maybe or maybe not. I mean, there may well be changes that actually you're going to make that enable you to be more vulnerable. And that might come with some points of failure in whatever sort of task or whatever project that you're setting yourself. So actually believing you're going to succeed is not what this is about. Fear of failure is probably a more significant thing than believing you will succeed. Fear of failure is one of the biggest inhibitors professionally and personally that human beings face, being frightened to fail. And of course, if you think about it in childhood, you've got to do right. You've got to get a good grade at school. You've got to do this well at college. When you're in your career, you must always be on the up. No, is the simple answer. Embracing change might be that it's time to pivot. It might be that it's time to readjust the targets and challenges that you've set for yourself. It might be it's time to change completely to something different. It might be that actually you're going to go and live off grid and you're not going to have a career. So actually believing that you'll succeed means you need to redefine success. You need to redefine what it means to change. Analyzing what went wrong is as good as analyzing what went right. So another thing in what is not in the change mindset is always thinking we've got to get better at everything. So I've got to, play against my weaknesses and I've got to build up my weaknesses and make them strengths. No, I challenge that is also not part of embracing change, because actually what you're doing is you're just feeling as it is to be human. And humans are not all-powerful and all-conquering. They are just part of an ecosystem and have strengths and weaknesses. They also have opportunities and threats, to use the marketing jargon. But really importantly, giving yourself credit for the fact that you're willing to take a chance. You're willing to do something differently. That's where the credit comes from here. And so what is not in a change mindset is giving yourself credit when you win, giving yourself credit for success. That is not part of this equation. What is part of this equation is actually giving yourself credit for when you've listened, when you've been present, when you've reflected, and when you've learned, so that the very next step that you take feels and is slightly different. Because it's at that point then you realize I'm actually adopting and embracing change. So we need to if we're going to decide to have this change mindset, which, to be honest, is really summed up in one single word, which is acceptance. If we can accept that change is inevitable, if we can accept that we and everything around us that ever has been and that ever will be is in a constant sort of flow of change, then we're starting to make inroads here. But we probably as human beings, and particularly as career people, want to take some form of shall I use the word control? No, I'm not going to use the word control. I'm going to use the word influence over the situation that we're in. So there's a lovely model which describes, the idea is that you can, if you want to change behavior, your own or someone else's, you've got to do three things. You've got to direct the rider, you've got to motivate the elephant on which the rider's riding, and you've got to shape the path. So there's just these 3 little tips of ways that you can actually take on some of these conceptual ideas that I'm talking about in a practical sense. So direct the rider, step 1. This is about making the destination crystal clear. You know, a rider likes to contemplate and analyze information before deciding on a direction. So when the rider isn't exactly sure which direction to go, they often then lead the elephant they're riding on in circles. And of course, often what looks like resistance is actually just lack of clarity. So be super clear. If you're looking to change something, where are we actually headed with this? What is my preferred destination? What would I like to put into the sat-nav as my destination? Because then you can think about point 2, which is motivating the elephant. So this is making people feel the need for change. When an individual's 6-ton elephant is not in agreement with the direction their rider wants to go, the rider's going to lose. The rider may get their way temporarily through close monitoring and exerting self-control, but in the long term, the elephant will always overpower the rider. Why? Because self-control is an exhaustible resource. So often what looks like resistance is actually exhaustion. You run out of power, you run out of fuel. So motivation provides the energy the rider needs to maintain self-control, because a lack of motivation may doom a change effort. So what we're doing here is we're starting to think, okay, if I've now got a clear destination, what I need to do is put in place a system or a process or an ecosystem that allows me to make those steps to actually take that journey. And again, professionally or personally. And point 3, shaping the path, making the required changes specific. So to direct the rider and motivate the elephant, we need to shape the path by focusing the situation, including the surrounding environment, to make the change more likely. So being specific narrows the focus so the elephant and the rider are more likely to stay traveling together towards the goal. And again, often what looks like resistance is actually a lack of direction. So plotting things out with a destination in sight. Again, this is not rocket science, but it really helps you to both sense how you're going in this change, but also it's a motivator in itself. No need for positive affirmations and rah, rah, we can do this, guys. It's all about careful, stoic process. So setting the destination, being crystal clear, ensuring that you're surrounded with like-minded others, that's important. We don't want dissenters on this journey to change. And then making sure that you're monitoring it as you go so that you've got steps and a pathway to achieving what it is you want to change. So this is starting to introducing now some techniques that you can begin to use that are very well proven. The next one is from Berkeley University, which is about, okay, well, why would we want to change? Okay, Neil, you've kind of given us all these lovely quotes and you've talked about, getting a good mindset, and that in itself sounds fine. But why would I need to change anything? That just sounds like good living. That just sounds like just good mindful living. And the answer is yes. Because what you need to do is evaluate when you do this self-reflection, if you're going to be embracing change as a concept, to just take a view as to, well, okay, if I'm going to change something, I need to kind of evaluate, well, why am I changing? So you need to be looking at the background initially. So in other words, what current problems do I need to solve? I mean, and basically, how did we get here? How did I arrive at this point? So just putting a context in place and then thinking about the current state. So, okay, so where actually are we now? What actually is this? And I need to be honest here, where actually am I? What is the reality? And there's no, dressing this up in something it's not. This is the honesty bit comes into play here. Vulnerability scoring points here, definitely. And why is what we're doing currently not working? So the fact you're even thinking about a particular topic that you want to change means that there's something either, very, very overtly wrong with the situation, scenario, project, person, or whatever it is, or it's just something that's been niggling away at you. And you think, I've really got to think about this because something isn't quite right. So this is your current state, the background of what you're trying to evaluate as to why you want to change it. And it might also be that there's some opportunities around you that are being missed. And there is one at the moment, for me personally, I've got this big focus on metaverse marketing. What is the value of, the metaverse to marketers? And I'm on this real crusade right now. And because this is constant change, because the technology is changing, the world is changing, the customer needs are changing, I'm changing in terms of the knowledge I have of this topic, is I've got to be so on the ball because I don't want to miss any opportunities. And so this is really, for me, a great example of, it can be solving a problem, but it can also be solving an opportunity. So the current state, really evaluating, why do I want to change? Why do I need to learn more? Why do I need to go down this particular route? And then thinking about the risks of not taking action. So you could decide not to decide. You could decide, I'm not going to change. But of course, as we know, with every decision comes consequences. I'm not saying they're going to be good or bad or whatever, but there will be consequences. There always have been, there always will be for every decision you take. So the risks of not taking action, you're going to be asking the question, well, what future problems do I anticipate if I don't do any action or if I don't change? And if I'm working in an organization, what's the impact to the organization if we don't change this thing? Now, it might be that it's very small, and as coming through this exercise of just evaluating why change, you think, actually, now I've evaluated it, it's not as big as I thought. There's an opportunity over here that's bigger. Right, I'm going to go over and look over there. So it might be you do decide not to choose, but that in itself is a choice and it is a decision. And then the benefits of taking action come into this evaluation. What are the benefits of making the change? And again, if you're in business, what is the impact to the organization? So you're looking at the background, the current state, the risks of not doing anything, and then the impact and the benefits of that impact. So it's a really sort of fascinating little journey of self-reflection. So rather than just jumping into change, hey, Neil said we should change, let's just change. It is about stopping, pausing, being mindful, and weighing up your both opportunities and also risks. So it is about involving and taking time to change. Now, some of the stuff we're talking about here could be big ticket items. Okay, so when we begin to look at some of the skills involved in embracing change, we need to be very mindful that some of this stuff is going to be possibly life-changing, possibly career-changing, possibly business changing. It might completely pivot your organization. But some of the stuff, and in fact, probably most of the stuff that you're going to encounter when it comes to change are tiny changes. Tolstoy talked about a true life is lived when tiny changes occur. In other words, if you can live and just be observant to all the little changes and little nuances and subtleties of stuff changing on a day-to-day basis, you're going to become so much more awake and aware of the small things that could turn into big things. And this is really important. And you do have a responsibility to do this. If you have the capability, the mindset, and the skills to do this, then you are going to be like the 38% of employees who don't mind leaving their comfort zone. Forbes.com did a study on the acceptance of change, and they found that 62% of employees across a range of different industries don't like leaving their comfort zone. So if you just happen to be one of the 38% who thinks, this actually quite sounds exciting, or even to the point of, yeah, this sounds acceptable if I have the right skills, I kind of could play with my mindset and explore, then you are in the 38% of people who really would be actually very valuable, both to the world around them, but to the organization if they were to embrace change. So let's see some of the skills and some of the reasons for doing this in just a moment. But I just want to kind of just pause just for a moment on that whole comfort zone thing. Why do some people just want to stick in comfort zone? Why is it that you're on this particular session, maybe exploring the concept of change and maybe exploring to see whether or not you might be able to embrace it? Well, because people stay in their comfort zone, they have this perception, and of course it is only a perception, that they feel safe and in control. They're not. They're probably not any less in control than you or I if we're outside of our comfort zone. But there is this perception of that. And just outside of the comfort zone is the fear zone. Remember the imposter syndrome thing I talked about before? Well, the fear zone is just outside your comfort zone, where you might find an excuse not to go there, not to do that talk, not to do that presentation, not to try that option. And it probably is down to lack of self-confidence or being affected by the opinions of others. Oh, what will he think? What will they think? What will she think? It really doesn't matter. If you can push beyond the fear zone, you then start to get into the learning zone. Remember I said about you don't learn stuff when it's easy. You don't learn anything in the comfort zone, but move yourself even further outside of fear zone into the learning zone. And you're going to start to deal with challenges and problems that you might not otherwise have encountered. You will be extending your comfort zone, because once you get used to them, because you've acquired the new skills and the confidence to be able to do them, suddenly the comfort zone also incorporates what was the fear zone, but also the learning zone. Wow, so I can continuously learn, continuously change and improve. This is interesting. Is there anything further, Neil? Well, yes, there is. Then there's the growth zone, where you can actually work to a new set of goals. You can conquer objectives that you used to be limited by. You can live out your dreams, actually make them happen. They aren't just some little pipe dream that exists outside of your comfort zone that you're never actually going to do, and you've been kidding yourself that you will. Suddenly, they become real. And it's in the growth zone, in this great expanded universe that you now have available to you professionally and personally, that you may well find your purpose, that ikigai, that thing that you can do to live and breathe your reason for being on an everyday, every moment basis. A really, really interesting concept that you can start to explore there. And to change often is to be perfect, according to Winston Churchill. Churchill said to improve is to change. So great. He was agreeing with the comfort zone kind of analogy there. But to be perfect is to change often. So this isn't a one-time activity. Here's a little reminder from Churchill to us here, is just stop wasting time thinking you can do this in one hit. You really, really couldn't. You really, really can't. Once you've opened this little Pandora's box of opportunity, you have to be able to see this thing through. So really interesting concept here, that this is a continual journey. So we need some models then to help us on our journey. Now, there are there are more than 5, but there are 5 key change models that you can consider, particularly if you're trying to apply this for your business. And a lot of you obviously listening and watching this will be thinking this from a professional perspective. And this is really where these models have come through from. But you will notice one in particular, the one I'm going to highlight in particular, is one that you can also use in some of the more impactful moments in your personal life as well. So these change models, we've got Kotter's, we've got McKinsey's 7S's, we've got the ADKAR change model, we've got Kubler-Ross, which I'm going to talk about, and we have Lewin's change management model as well. So you just got to Google those if you want to find a little bit more details about each one. But I want to focus on the one that for me is the most powerful, because it focuses predominantly on people. Now, a lot of these models focus a lot on process. Now, depending on what kind of organization or situation personally you're finding yourself in, you might be more of a process-driven person or organization. You might be more focused, and because a lot of these models come out of things like IT, for example, they tend to be very process-driven for all the right reasons. But for me, the Kubler-Ross model, it's a 5-stage change process model, and it focuses on people. And the emotions of the people going through change. And the 5 steps are, and see if you can relate to this when you've had to go personally through a significant change. See if you can remember going through this: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Now, if you have lost somebody close to you, so somebody's passed away, you will almost certainly have gone through this. It's not the grieving process as such, but it is very, very closely aligned with that. Denial, then anger, then some kind of bargaining, trying to get the best possible solution out of the situation, then a point of feeling demotivated, unsupported in the depression phase. And then eventually, as you emerge from the change that is inevitably, struck on you, the point of acceptance. if this is in a work situation, when employees realize there's no point in fighting the change anymore, and they finally accept what's happening and then often resign themselves to it. So this 5-stage process, this 5-stage model is really, really interesting to really understand the energy flow within embracing change. So what happens basically is that over time, you're seeing a different level of acceptance of change, different understanding of change, sort of different kind of emotions and impact really of it. So the morale and competence, if you were to take the model, which was back in 1969, actually, Kubler-Ross came up with this model. And said, there are a number of kind of emotions that we go through as we change. Now, you can really sort of put these and really dumb these down if you need to for a much smaller kind of issue or change that you might be going through. But if it's a big ticket, as I say, losing somebody close to you, or maybe you've just been sacked from your job or something like that, you will be going through the change curve, as it's called, to a greater or lesser extent. But the fact is, you will be going through the curve. Sometimes some of these steps will be very, very quick. Sometimes you will find yourself spending a lot longer in certain points of the curve. But the point is, the curve is going to happen whether you do it and whether you work with it or not. Okay, so the shock, the denial, the frustration, the depression, the experimentation, then the decision-making, and then the integration of this new world on the other side is all part of this change curve. So just pause just for a moment and think about a change that you're going through. And let's face it, we're all going through change right now. Just think of a simple change example that you're going through right now and think, okay, well, where am I actually on the change curve? Am I in that kind of early phase of either surprise or shock at the situation? Am I in the denial phase where I'm kind of sort of disbelieving it and thinking, hold on, it really isn't true, is it? Really, has this really happened to me? Is this really going on? Seriously? And then the frustration phase, which can sort of move to anger, which is recognizing that, right, now things are changing now, aren't they? Or they've already changed and I really don't want to accept this. I just want to go back to how things were. It's that kind of point. And then when you realize that, no, it's changing properly, for some people, they will lack energy. They will lack the sort of the confidence, or they'll get into a low mood state. It's called the depression phase in the change curve. And that is the dip before things start to get better, as you start to accept the change, as you start to experiment or engage with the new scenario on the other side, as you start to make decisions that, well, okay, what opportunities does this now open up for me that I didn't have before this particular change? And these things could be financial, they could be personal, they could be based around relationships or projects or campaigns at work or whatever it is. You're starting to then explore some new opportunities from the situation. And then the integration phase comes when, and this is where I often see this when kind of working or coaching people, I often find that this is the bit where suddenly they say, well, do you know, the penny dropped. It's just, I suddenly realized, oh, wow, I've come out the other side, and oh, wow, I can actually do this. And it's almost, you see a lifting, the weight has gone. It's a really, really fascinating thing to do and to see. And we all experience it, as I say, to a greater or lesser extent. So you can look at it in those terms, or you can go into the process of transition, which was John Fisher using this as a personal transition curve, which is a far more detailed thing that John Fisher came up with in 2012. A few more steps in there, a few more nuances. And again, lots of these things will give us opportunities, particularly if we're trying to take others through change. So either colleagues or people who report to us, if we're taking them through a change because the team has changed, or maybe we're working on different products, or the organization has gone through a merger or acquisition or something, and there's fundamental change, and we have to lead people through, actually helping them to understand where they are and recognizing that fear, threat, guilt, depression, hostility is all okay. It's not a bad thing. All these emotions are just emotions. They are just us being human on the change curve. but knowing that at some point when it feels right, for some people it's quick, for others it takes a lot longer, and that's not bad either. But for some people, hopefully everybody, coming through this change curve, there will be something on the other side, so that eventually then they can actually move forward. So these models, and particularly this one, is a really, really great way of just contextualizing the reality behind something that can be a little bit kind of out there, if you like, because we can all say, oh, change this, change that. But until we actually break it down to a more granular level, it becomes less really tangible, I guess, for us. So there is a 7 R's model, which is a nice little checklist, particularly if you're doing this professionally in work. And the 7 R's are reason, risks, resources, raised, return, responsible, relationship. So the reason behind the change, the risks involved in the requested change, the resources required to deliver the change, who raised the change request, the sponsor, in other words, the return required from the change, you've got to see some kind of outcome or ROI, and then who's responsible for creating, testing, and implementing the change. And importantly, the relationship between the suggested change and other changes. So the contingency plan, the forecast of how this is going to look different on the other side. That list comes from ntaskmanager.com, and you can see if you go to the ntaskmanager.com site and search for the 7 R's model, you can do a little bit more of a deeper dive into some of those contexts, because those little nuances are really important. Change isn't a one step to step 2 and then to step 3. It's a subtle kind of dance, if you like, of really sort of subtle things that are going on. And as we say, it's emotional as well as practical. So understanding some of those R's and really getting a heart to the heart of this being a project is a really, really great way of managing it. And if you're facilitating a change process, we're getting deeper and deeper into the company side of things now, into the business side, you can be using, obviously, some change management tools. And as I said earlier, a lot of these are planning orientated, and they tend to be sort of based around sort of IT and process management tools. But if you need some tools to kind of help engage with others and to help reporting of change management that you're going through, then you can go to userguiding.com. They've got some really good examples in there. Another one that as well that has come through sort of quite nicely here from the changecompass.com is a phrase that they say, hit your change and transformation targets through analytics. Change is about measurement, analytics, and evaluation. So, you can't just say, oh, we changed. And then somebody will challenge you and say, yeah, but how much? By what scale? What numbers? And how did you do it? And well, I did it like this in this process. Yeah, but how big was that process? And how many people did you need? And how much did it cost? And to have all of that detail behind you, transformation and positive hitting of targets comes through analysis of the detail behind it. Okay, so I started off with mindset, which is this ethereal kind of setting of the context for transformation. But the actual transformation comes through from very clear project management based around clear goals. Remember the elephant and rider analogy there a little bit earlier, but also actually getting some software tools potentially that you're going to be using to make the process as smooth and seamless as possible, not only for the people in the team, but also for anybody else, any stakeholder who's impacted by the change that you're putting in place. So if you're doing this from a business perspective, think also about, okay, if we change something, it's going to change everything. And it really, really is. There's always a domino effect of change. So even if your project feels quite isolated and standalone, it won't be. It will have a change on the people who have been involved in it and their colleagues. There will be change involved for management in terms of reporting, in terms of assessment and evaluation of your performance. And even as far out as customers, they'll notice, they'll see something is different. So every change has to be very mindful of the stakeholders that are going to be impacted by it. So having some of these tools available to you, you can go to whatfix.com to get a series of tools, some software tools that they list out, which might help you to kind of manage and facilitate the change that you really desire, because it's so, so important to do this in a really sort of constructive way. That is really key here. Partly mindset, but partly using the skills and understanding of process and project management and facilitation of people. That is the way forward here. So I'd like to finish having talked about mindset, and it's not all positive. It is about being pragmatic, and also talking about some of the models, the Kubler-Ross change curve, to just really get you started on this choreographing of the acceptance, or hopefully the embracing of change. But I'd like to finish with this really, really poignant, really interesting little poem from Roy T. Bennett called The Light in the Heart. And this says, don't just learn, experience. Don't just read, absorb. Don't just change, transform. Don't just relate, advocate. Don't just promise, prove. Don't just criticize, encourage. Don't just think, ponder. Don't just take, give. Don't just see, feel. Don't just dream, do. Don't just hear, listen. Don't just talk, act. Don't just tell, show. And don't just exist, live. I think that's a really key kind of mindset really to be having here, is that this is about pushing the game forward. Change is one of those things that allows us to really develop and evolve as human beings and as professionals. And for me, those kind of things just stretch every single facet and aspect of this on one notch. And that is change. That is what we're trying to do here. So if this stuff has whetted your appetite and you think, oh, I need to do more about this, this is really interesting. I have found on the Berkeley University website a fascinating and really useful change management toolkit. So if you go to hr.berkeley.edu and then search change management toolkit.pdf, you will find a very comprehensive change management guide, which will take you much deeper into each one and pretty much every one of the things that I've been talking about here in this session. And so if change and embracing change, managing change, facilitating change, helping others to change is now on your radar and you think, okay, I want to do some more on this, then that would be my next recommended point of call.